As a newcomer to Canada, applying for your first job can be stressful. The recruitment process may be different from what you've experienced back home, and it can take some time to understand what will make your application stand out in Canada's competitive job market. As you look for your first job in Canada, your resume will likely be key in determining whether or not you get the role. In Canada, most companies run the resumes they receive through a resume scanning software to filter ones that best match the requirements laid out in the job description. If you're shortlisted, your resume and cover letter will be sent to a recruiter or hiring manager, and they'll decide whether you're an ideal candidate for the position. Since your resume will determine the first impression you make on the hiring manager, there's a lot riding on what you include or not. Should you really submit that extra page? Is it okay to exaggerate your credentials? What about using a fun font? Here are 10 common resume mistakes newcomers tend to make and guidance on how to avoid them. In this video, we'll cover the following resume mistakes to avoid. Using the same resume for different job applications. Not reading the job description before creating your resume. Listing job responsibilities instead of achievements. Grammatical errors and typos in your resume. Creating a resume that's too long or too short. Not using action verbs. Including information not typically included in Canadian resumes. Submitting a cluttered or improperly formatted resume. Listing inaccurate contact information. Lying on your resume. Using the same resume for different job applications. Landing your first job in Canada can take a few months, and it's easy to get overwhelmed and exhausted by the process. When you're applying to hundreds of job positions, the idea of using the same generic resume for multiple positions can be tempting. However, customizing your resume significantly improves your chances of being selected. Every job is unique, and your application should be too. While your applicant profile won't vary significantly from one application to the next, the way in which you present it should be customized for each company and job opening. A good way to do this is to look for keywords in each job posting and sprinkle them throughout your resume where they make sense. This will help your resume get past both the resume scanning software and human recruiters tasked with reading dozens, if not hundreds of applications. Be sure to include experience and behavioral traits mentioned in the job posting. For example, if the ideal candidate is proficient with a certain type of software, you should definitely mention any experience you have with it. At the same time, remove experiences and skills that aren't a match, so whoever reads your resume isn't distracted by non-essential items. Not reading the job description before creating your resume. Reading the job description will give you vital information about the role and the potential candidate an organization is looking for, including key skills and experiences. Not only will this information help you determine if you're a good candidate, it'll also help you craft the perfect resume. Many Canadian employers use applicant tracking systems to screen resumes and shortlist ones that match the job description. This means it's essential your application takes the job ad into consideration. As mentioned above, you'll want to look for keywords and descriptions you can include in your cover letter and resume. It's also a good idea to include some synonyms and similar words to these keywords. The idea is to include just enough keywords for your resume to pass the ATS, while ensuring that it reads well for a human recruiter. Only include keywords where it makes sense to do so, and don't include too many in a row. Your cover letter and resume should always be grammatically correct, easy to read, and flow naturally. Listing job responsibilities instead of achievements. Unlike some countries where resumes are supposed to outline your past roles and responsibilities, in Canada resumes focus on achievements. Listing past job responsibilities doesn't tell future employers how you performed in a role. The goal is to make you stand out from every other applicant with similar job experience, so make sure you emphasize what you brought to a company or team as an individual. The best way to do this is by listing achievements, citing numbers or data that may grab an employer's attention, or describing challenges you overcame. This isn't the time to be modest. You want to share what makes you special. Grammatical errors and typos in your resume. Proofread, and proofread again before hitting send. Missing grammatical errors and typos is the worst resume mistake you can make and can cost you a job, even if you're a good candidate for the role. Grammatical errors will make your resume stand out in all the wrong ways, undermining your credibility and bringing into question your attention to detail. If possible, have a friend, family member, or mentor proofread your cover letter and resume as well. This is even more important if English isn't your first language. You can use spell check as a guide, but don't rely on it to catch all your errors. Creating a resume that's too long or too short. One of the biggest questions Canadian job seekers have is how long their resume should be. The exact answer depends on the specific job at hand and an applicant's work experience, but generally resumes should be 1 to 2 pages long. A cover letter should be no longer than 1 page, but not shorter than 3 to 4 paragraphs. The more years of work experience you have under your belt, the closer to 2 pages your resume can be. If you're fresh out of school or less than a decade into your career, it's better to stick to 1 page. As you progress in your career, it's also normal to cut out early career work experience and keep educational experience to a single line. A recruiter for a senior level position doesn't need to read about your early 20s internships or time spent in debate club. Not using action verbs. You want to use powerful and impactful language in your resume, which means using action verbs. Action verbs are verbs that imply that the subject is doing something. These are a great way to showcase your initiative, rather than passively saying you were responsible for something. Good examples of action words to use in a cover letter or resume include led, managed, succeeded, surpassed, created, and delivered. Try to use a mix of action words and avoid repeating the same ones in consecutive points. Including information not typically included in Canadian resumes. In Canada, you're not supposed to include information like your marital status, religion, gender, age, or sexual orientation in your cover letter or resume. Unless you're applying for a modeling or acting job, you're also not supposed to include a photo or headshot. Not only will this extra information take up valuable page space, it could cause a potential employer to avoid your resume for fear of accusations of unintentional or intentional discrimination. It's actually illegal in Canada for an employer to ask for information like your sexual orientation, age, or ethnicity in a job application process or interview. To avoid putting a recruiter or employer in an awkward situation, it's best to stay away from these topics. It's also considered improper to include salary expectations or irrelevant personal hobbies in your application. In Canada, you can skip writing references available upon request, as that's understood and doesn't need to be stated. Submitting a cluttered or improperly formatted resume. First and foremost, a resume should always be organized and easy to read. An employer should be able to easily pick out your work experience, any volunteer experience, and educational background. Be sure to leave enough white space around text. This typically means 1 or 1.5 line spacing and wider margins. Job applications also aren't the time to get creative with fonts. Stick to classics like Times New Roman, Arial, or Calibri with a size of at least 10, but not larger than 14. Avoid mixing fonts or using too many different font sizes. Also avoid going overboard with bolding, underlining, or italicizing. Listing inaccurate contact information. It doesn't matter how great your resume is if a potential employer can't contact you. If you've recently moved or changed your phone number or email address, make sure the information included in your cover letter and resume is up to date. Either way, proofread this information multiple times to avoid typos. It's also important to make sure your email address is professional. Ideally, it should be formatted first name. Last name, or using your initials, and not include any nicknames or slang language. Lying on your resume. You may be tempted to exaggerate your experience or accomplishments, but this is a big ethical no-no and a deal-breaker for any potential employer. Many Canadian recruiters and employers will verify your credentials and background through other sources, whether that's by calling references, conducting background checks, or looking you up on LinkedIn or other social media platforms. If you lie, you're very likely to get caught. If you're worried about an employment gap, it's better to plan to explain it than cover it up with a lie. As a newcomer, landing a first job can be challenging. However, it's important to avoid the urge to embellish or lie to make your resume more impressive. Remember, most employment contracts include a clause that allows an employer to terminate your position if they find you lied on your job application. That's not the type of stress you need hanging over your head. Having a good resume is crucial for your job search. Your resume is essentially your first interaction with a prospective employer, and it should convey why you're an ideal candidate for the job. By avoiding these common mistakes, you can make a positive impression and stand out among a pool of candidates to land a job in Canada. If you're feeling unsure about how to create a Canadian resume, there's no need to worry. You can easily craft one using our free Canadian Resume Builder available on the Play Store. We offer a variety of resume templates and cover letter formats to choose from, making the process straightforward and hassle-free. Thank you.